All right. Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining us. We're going to give it a couple minutes while everyone comes into the room. Feel free and type in the chat where you're coming in today. We always love to hear who's coming from where. Anyone? Let us know where you're coming in from.
Oh, I'm coming
India.
from Los
Wow.
Angeles.
In Arizona, hopefully it's warm. Tennessee, San Francisco, California. Is it warm or cold where everyone is? It's pretty cold where I am right now. Chicago, cold, I know. Austin, yay. I used to live there. Warm in LA, send some warmness my way. I would love that. More LA. For people just coming into the room, feel free and let us know where you're coming in from. We're just going to give it another minute or so while people come into the room. And just so you know, during the chats, if you have questions throughout, feel free and put them in the chat box. And we'll either get to the questions like in a chat answer, or we'll have it through the talk, and we'll have lots of time for Q&A at the end too. So, all right, well, let's go ahead and get started. Thank you so much for joining us all today. As you know, we're talking about how to work abroad. So Traverse Journeys, just to tell you a little bit about us, maybe you've joined us before, but we're a small group travel company. Of course, we're on a little bit of a pause right now as the world is waiting to heal from COVID, but we do small group trips in about 20 countries. And you can see People, Planet, Purpose is our tagline, and our trips are really, we focus on like immersive experiences, cross-cultural, really dive into local customs and traditions. That's where the people part comes from. And Planet, we explore some of the most beautiful nature on the earth. And we also really look towards sustainability in our trips, whether that's staying at an eco lodge or having a farm to table meal or taking part in some kind of local effort like heritage seed saving or ocean conservation. And the purpose piece, we really look for transformative experiences that you leave the trip leaving behind good things and taking away good things with you. So that's a little bit about Traverse. And today we have 3 of us on the call. So we're really excited to have this panel for you today. So my name's Ashley. I'm the founder of Traverse. And I also have with me Laura, my business partner with Traverse. She's helping with the admin because we've got lots of you guys today, and just to help keep up the chat box and the answers. And she's actually in Ireland right now. So just a little bit about me. I started traveling in high school, and in college, my focus was on Latin America. So I spent time in Costa Rica. I also studied in Spain. Later down the road, in my grad school program, I was in Brazil as well. And then professionally, my work took me all over. I was in China, I was in Europe, in Spain and Germany in particular, working in tourism as well, and also spent time in Canada. So we'll be getting to a lot more of the places that we have experience in as well living. I also taught English in South Korea. So that was more of the Asia side of my experiences later in my career. And now I live in Denmark, and we'll get to why I'm here and how I got here later. But that's just a little bit about my background. So we also have Lynze, if you'd like to introduce yourself.
Sure, thanks, Ashley. Hey, everyone, my name is Lynze Ballay. I am founder of She Works Abroad. We help professionals find their strategy in order to live and work internationally and have an amazing abroad lifestyle. So my background is that I started my career as a self-initiated expat in the Middle East, spent a lot of time in the Middle East. And then from there, worked for both a big company and a small company, and had short-term assignments, long-term assignments, opening offices in new markets all across Europe and in Asia, and then ended up starting She Works Abroad to help other people who wanted to have this type of experience. And I am located between Miami, Florida and Buenos Aires, Argentina, but currently Miami, Florida for obvious reasons of what's going on. And I did this and have done this all with a family too. So I am married. I have a toddler who might bang on the door at any moment. She has perfect timing. a dog, and also am expecting any day now too. So I'm here to help also the people who are thinking about, how do I do this either with a family or thinking about a family? How do I plan my international life? So it's a little bit about me, and then Alex is up next.
Awesome. Thanks so much. Hi, guys. I'm Alex Schmidt. I'm an American travel blogger, writer, and entrepreneur now based in Croatia. A little bit about me. I'm originally from the Twin Cities, Minnesota. I actually studied abroad in France and Croatia in college. And then after college, I kind of took some time and was traveling all around Europe. I then ended up moving to Ireland for 1 year on a working holiday visa. We'll get more into that later. But I'm now based in Dubrovnik, Croatia, and I've been here for the last three plus years. My partner is actually Croatian, so that's been one of the factors that has brought me abroad. My travel blog, The Mindful Mermaid, helps travelers explore the world more mindfully with responsible travel tips and in-depth guides. So I've worked with BBC, American Airlines, World Nomads, and some other tourism boards and all of that. So I've traveled quite a bit around Europe and Asia as well. So yeah, I'm happy to be here today and share the tips to help you all go abroad too someday.
All right, thank you, gals. So I'm just going to get a little overview of what we're going to cover. And like I said, do feel free, you can write questions in the chat, and Laura will do her best to answer, or we'll maybe save it for the end because we might already be covering it at some point in the talk, but do feel free to use that. So we're going to start out with some definitions. We'll talk about like expat, immigrant, digital nomads. We'll also talk about like why people move abroad, like employers, entrepreneurs, family, a lot of considerations there, talking about residency and visas. We'll get into some specific countries and lots of examples, because like where to go. Because sometimes too, there's the chicken and the egg, like do I choose a place that I want to live and go try and find work there, or do I focus on my career and where it could take me? So we'll talk about that. We'll also talk about travel in the times of COVID, because it does add a few complications, but it's still doable. And we'll talk about some of the challenges, like the just logistics of moving to a new place. But of course, it's also super rewarding. And then at the end, we'll have lots of time for questions. So, and I see too, yes, we have a question on retirement. We will talk about all ages also. So whether you're just coming out of college and you're wanting to do this, whether you're already in your kind of professional stride, or if you're retired and you want to find a way to also move abroad. So these can apply in different ways. So we'll start with Alex is going to give us some definitions.
Cool. Yeah. So we're just going to start off with talking about some working abroad terms and perspectives to be aware of. So there's a lot of words used in the working and living abroad space. You've probably heard some of these: expat, digital nomad, foreigner, international resident, etc. We'll be going more into these throughout the presentation. The word you probably hear the most often is expatriate or expat, which by definition is a person who lives outside of their native country. Now, this might be, well, traditionally it refers to those that choose to move abroad because of their profession, wanting a change in location or lifestyle, or all of the above. But the expat versus immigrant conversation is a really hot topic in the living abroad space. So by definition, immigrant is a person who comes to live permanently in a foreign country. That's also according to Oxford. So when we look at both of these definitions, expat and immigrant are quite broad. So now there's a lot of conversation about how immigrant should be more inclusive and apply to people that are also from the West that permanently move abroad. And there's also a push to see expat be more accessible and used regardless of one's background, citizenship, race, economic status, education, and not just a term reserved for people from the West. However, the terms are definitely going to vary across countries and culture. For example, in Croatia, and I know in Denmark, a lot of places in Europe, it's more common to refer to people just as foreigners and not the divide of expat immigrants. I personally prefer that. And then expat is a more common word used in Dubai, Hong Kong, etc. With all that being said, expat is still a really useful term for those that choose to go abroad, right? And it's used a lot, especially in professional settings. So that's probably the term you're going to be hearing most of today. And just an interesting cultural note here is kind of the terms we use to identify ourselves with really do shape our experience. So just from a personal example from me, I went from kind of calling myself a digital nomad going around Europe to then being an expat in Ireland and then an expat in Croatia to then getting to a point where I'm like, okay, well, I'm actually permanently going to be here in Croatia. And I kind of see myself as more of an immigrant, which is what I am on paper, at least until I become a citizen. So yeah, Ashley and Lynze, I don't know if you wanted to share any perspectives with that.
Yeah, I would say, I have a really similar experience in the expat and immigrant and foreigner. Like here in Denmark, there are a lot of expat communities that can be from the West, they can be from the Middle East, a lot of professionals. And when you go maybe to an event, you might say like, oh, it's for expats. However, a Dane would probably not call us expats, they would just call us a foreigner. But then for my own self-identification, kind of similar, I don't really think of myself as much of an expat because my social network and my community is a lot of Danish or Danish speakers. I also have family roots here. And so more by definition, it would be like an immigrant, but with also family connection, which Alex has as well in Croatia. So you kind of feel like there's some element of home as well. So I think that just that subjectivity of the terms do kind of shape our experience and how you think of yourself and the context, and it can evolve over time also.
Definitely. Yeah, just good perspectives to be mindful of throughout the presentation and journey if you do decide to go abroad.
Yeah. All right. So another little overview. So just to kind of break down, and we're going to get into like the deep nitty gritty about this in just a minute, but like just to think about like what takes us abroad. So we talk about like employer driven, like your employer sends you or you apply for a position within your firm to go abroad, or maybe your profession has a drive toward a certain area. Like a lot of times countries or regions might need more certain professional workers. You can think of like IT workers, for example. Or, you could be drawn to a particular destination, whether that's a country in itself or it's a region. A lot of times this applies with when we start talking about like the digital nomads and the shorter versus the longer term of staying somewhere. Sometimes people want more of the experience of going to a place for a short amount of time, but still feeling like they've lived there for maybe a few months, for example. Family driven, we'll talk a little bit about more if you have heritage or roots or connections in a place. And then sometimes an entrepreneurial opportunity might take you somewhere, or if you're self-employed, that gives you a lot more flexibility where you can go or how you can manage your work. And then there's also education, like Laura's an example, getting her master's degree in Ireland. So that could take you abroad. And a lot of times that might cause you to stay abroad because maybe you get a degree abroad and then find work after that, or just fall in love with the place and find a way to stay. So there are a lot of reasons that we might go abroad and ways that we get there. So Lynze's gonna, or actually I'm gonna talk about this part and then Lynze's gonna get into like the really like professional piece, but wanted to kind of just start out talking a little bit about visas, particularly tourist visas, because we're probably most familiar with those if you've traveled. And a really good example is the tourist visa in the Schengen zone, which is similar to, but not exactly the same as the European Union, with 26 countries in the Schengen zone, which for Americans, as well as many other countries, you would have to look at your own country to verify. But what it is it's a 90-day limit within a 6-month period, meaning you could either stay those consecutive days or you could break it up within that period, but then you need a 90-day break. So that's an example of why you can't just pick up and move to Europe, for example, because you need to have the correct kind of visa. And if you're just traveling here, you're coming in on a tourist visa. Other examples of what people do, this can be really common in, like I've known people in Costa Rica that have done this, or Morocco, where you have a visa limit, meaning you enter on a tourist visa and it might be like 90 days, but you can exit and re-enter and it resets it. So that it doesn't have like a maximum number of days in a period of time like the Schengen zone does. So that's how some other approaches are. But these are both, what I'm talking about right here are tourist visas, not work visas. We'll be talking about work visas in a minute, but just so you know. And then there's also family-driven and residency. So I mentioned that I'm here in Denmark, and my family background, my mom is from Denmark, born here. But I was born in the US, I grew up in the US, and she became a US citizen later. But it wasn't until 2015, Denmark opened up dual citizenship. And so long story short, that allowed me, based on my mom's place of birth, to apply for residency, not citizenship yet. You actually have to prove a lot of different things in Denmark specifically. For that, you have to show what they call strong ties. That includes language, that includes paying taxes, a lot of different things. So I have residency and am on a path to citizenship, but that's still really long. Other cases in family-driven types of visas and residency within Europe, there are many different countries like Poland, I know, Italy, Spain, where if you have a family member up to maybe your grandparent or great-grandparent that was born there, there's a pathway toward heritage, again, visa and residency, and possibly citizenship. It's usually a pathway though, it's not just automatic. And I know, Alex, in your case, there's also something similar in Croatia, because I think you said it was your grandparents.
Yeah, I think now they actually have removed that it's not up until like your great grandparents or anything. You just have to have proof that like your great grandparents have some documentation that you're Croatian. So that's kind of similar with a lot of countries in Europe now.
Yeah, so that's how some of these heritage or family driven visas and residency work. And then if you have an educational institution, if you're part of a university, you get a visa for that. Now be aware that if you're on an educational visa, it doesn't necessarily mean you can work at the same time. You would have to make sure that you can do both, because a visa to enter does not necessarily allow you to work. So, but it is ways you can stay longer. So just that's one other way. And then another one, which I did, teaching English, and I put these particular places, the UAE, South Korea, and China, because they're so common in places that you teach English, which you do typically need a degree. I don't know, different schools are going to have different requirements, whether it's a bachelor's or a master's, but like a teaching English course, which is not too hard to do, like you have to get a certificate for that. That's what most requirements are. But I see a question about Japan. Most schools, like it typically comes down to the school rather than like the country, what they require for the certification, but there'll be some form of teaching English, either certification and or experience as well, depending on the level of the school and if you're teaching kids or teaching adults. But what will happen is the school then sponsors you. So that's how you receive your visa and residency that way. So that's one form of visas and working abroad. And now we're going to pass it on to Lynze to talk more about the work and employer and profession driven visas.
Okay, all right, thank you. So what I want to do is I want to highlight kind of the top ways to take your job abroad, for you to be a professional, to continue pursuing your professional career and endeavors, and also do it while growing your career internationally. And that's something that I'm really passionate about, and I really focus on, because it stops what sometimes I refer to as the bad boomerang, which is the annoying thing that can happen where you go and you work abroad, or you spend a little bit of time abroad, you go for a program, et cetera, and then you have to come back to your home country to kind of check in, and then you can go abroad again later, but you kind of do this ping pong back and forth, which for some people is great, but for others like me with a family and a career, et cetera, I needed something that was a little bit more, had a little bit more longevity and long-termness to it. So I'm going to go through what the employer-driven visa, the professional-driven visa, and the remote versus visa in country, and what that actually looks like. So when it comes to an employer-driven visa, this is what my grandma thinks is available. So it has been around for a really long time. It is that expat. This is when your company sends you abroad. So your company, the company that you're working for, decides, hey, Lynze, we need you to be working in Zimbabwe. We need you to be working in Iceland, wherever. And they help you go through that transition. So they help you with your visa. They help you with your moving. There's so many things that they can help you with. Sometimes it's a big fat package. Some other times it's a little skinny package, but ultimately they have decided that they are going to sponsor you in that foreign location. Now, this is awesome, but it's also starting to go away because the world is so much more global and people are able to kind of make their own career decisions about where and when they want to work. We're seeing companies really start to limit this. So I'll tell you how this typically plays out. What I see is someone will join an organization, an international organization, or think about joining, and they will want to go abroad. They'll have as part of their career map what they're looking for, part of their development plan. But it has to be right place, right time, right? Because it's up to the company whether they want to pay for you to make that move. And it has to be the right time and location and things for you too. So this can put some limits and some confines. And what I have seen personally and what the data shows is that there are way more people who want to go abroad than companies that have the ability to transfer them, right? So like those two needs don't mix together, which is then where you get the second one that comes out, which is the profession-driven visa. This is what I refer to as the self-initiated expat. This is what I was in the beginning. I went out and found my own international opportunity. Essentially, I wasn't waiting for an organization to transfer me or to pay for my move. I knew if I wanted to be in that location or be abroad, I was going to have to find a job and find a job on the ground. What did that actually look like and entail? I think we put up a really good question of the chicken or the egg. Is it location first? Like I decide I want to go work in Dubai, and so I pursue that, or is it profession and where your profession needs you? This is a really important piece of the puzzle because sometimes you can want to go to a place really bad. Like for example, I only want to go to Paris. I love Paris. I love everything about being a Parisian. It's the best thing ever. But I am a underwater basket weaver, and it seems like there are no jobs available for underwater basket weavers in Paris, right? So you can kind of decide up to a certain point where you want to go, but there has to be that professional pull, whether it be something that's in demand, a shortage, a role that is really a hot commodity, et cetera, that's going to allow you to jump the visa hurdle. And when you are professional driven, you're going to get a work visa, same as employer driven, a work visa that gives you the right to work and live in that country, usually for up to a period of time, and typically renewable. So your organization applies on your behalf. This is a big mishap that I see people saying, like, I'm going to apply for my work visa. Actually, 99% of the time, your employer or where you have a contract from will have to, they have to apply for you. You have to provide documentation, but they are sponsoring you. And that sponsorship is great because it comes with a lot of the benefits that you get from working and living on the ground. The ability to be in that country for long periods of time. Sometimes the visas are even up to like 10 years that you can be there. The ability to rent an apartment, to buy a car, to do all of these things so that you can have a life abroad in a location that you're excited about, right? So, which brings us to the third piece, the remote versus visa in country. And this is a topic that is exploding because it is changing in real time, which is very exciting, I think, for all of us who are interested in living and working abroad and what that looks like, knowing that there's a lot of things changing at the moment is actually an exciting next step for this development, where typically it's been a little bit like bureaucratic and a lot of visa paperwork, et cetera. Now we have this ability to say, okay, I want to work professionally in a country and I want all the benefits that come with that. Typically those benefits, again, are ability to enter and exit for long periods of time, get an apartment, healthcare. In some cases, it helps you with childcare, helps you with your spouse getting a job, all of those good things. Remote workers, on the other hand, that's a visa in country. Remote workers, on the other hand, the ability to go and stay there, but you might not have access to some of those benefits that you would have if you had a work visa. Because your work visa is essentially saying like you are someone who's employed and living in this country. Remote is we're letting you come into this country because we know you have a job in another place that's paying you, and we're going to give you some benefits, et cetera, for being here, but you don't have the ability to stay long term or be here for a long time. It is kind of driven by what that remote visa looks like, right? And the question that we just got about taxes for remote visas, this is now all like bubbling to the surface. So if you are someone who lives in a foreign country, you pay those taxes of that country, right? Of where you are living. But if you're someone who's just dropping by for a few months or on a remote visa that's maybe for a year, there is still a lot of chatter around like, what does that look like from a tax perspective? Not only for you, but also for your company and what that might look like from a risk. I could go down a rabbit hole here, I will not. But I think ultimately, if you're thinking about, if you want to be living abroad long-term, over a year, 2 years in another location, you have the employer driven, your employer sending you, right? It's a little bit out of your control because you can't always have everything you want. The profession driven, which is you deciding as I'm gonna be a self-initiated expat, go out and find a job on the ground in a foreign country. Or am I gonna be someone who has the remote capacity to use one of these new professional nomad visas that we're seeing pop up, but know that there's some limitation to what I'm gonna be able to do on the ground. That's just a little bit about what it looks like to be a foreign worker with an expat or with a visa as part of that, as part of that assignment, if you will. So Ashley, did I hit all the things we wanted to hit?
Yeah, absolutely. I think one of the questions that I've seen and that we'll talk about a little bit later is, at what point do I find that job? Is it while I'm at home in my home country? Do I go, move or try to move to that place and find a job? And we'll get to that in a little bit. So I know that's come up for sure.
Yep, for sure. Or one of my favorite other questions, which is where do I find these jobs? Like, what's the job board for all these jobs? Y'all, if I had that, it'd be like the keys to the kingdom.
Right.
Absolutely.
And then the other side of it is the destination-driven visas, which don't necessarily mean that you're looking to relocate because of work. So that could be, relocating primarily because of the location. An example of that would be retirement. People that want to spend either a short or long-term period of time abroad, such as working holiday visas and digital nomad visas, which there's so much to be said about both of these. I had to make separate slides. So first we'll go into the working holiday visas. So this is actually what I did, and I'll explain a little bit more about that at the end of this slide. So working holiday visas, several countries around the world have them, but I just wanted to focus primarily on the United States. So working holiday visas allow US citizens between 18 to 30 who are recent graduates, either from undergrad or grad school, to work abroad from anywhere from 6 months to 2 years. So there are a number of countries that have this agreement with the US. So for example, Australia has an agreement and you can work in Australia for up to 12 months. New Zealand also has one for also 12 months, 1 year. Singapore, 6 months. South Korea actually has 24 months. So you could live in South Korea for 2 years. Canada, 6 months, and Ireland, 12 months. So when I graduated college, basically almost, 7 months after I graduated, I decided that I wanted to work somewhere in Europe, but I didn't have a job offer. And I actually was probably trying to do what we were explaining in the last slide. Like I didn't know what I was doing. I was just sending like random job applications to international job boards and nothing happened. But then I found this working holiday visa in Ireland. So I applied and I got it. And, you know, all of these different countries, there's going to be a fee and some different things you have to go through. But I got it. And then I literally just went to Ireland without anything planned, like no housing, no job or anything. I ended up getting a job working in Ireland. I lived in Cork. It's the second biggest city in Ireland. And I worked as a study abroad international advisor and ran a study abroad program for Americans. So it ended up being a really good fit and I had a great time. And the whole point of working holiday visas is that you can, you know, explore the country and it's somewhat of a holiday, but you're also working because it is for a fixed period of time. So I know we had a lot of questions about, you know, what if I don't have like this really crazy professional background? When I was there in Ireland, and I know I've talked to other people too that went to other countries, there were people that went and they got jobs as waiters or they were working in a hotel. There were a lot of different types of jobs there. So I actually wrote a blog post on this and it's linked at the end of the slides. So yeah, that's one thing to consider that can get you abroad. And then the other topic is digital nomad visas, which we touched upon. So these basically allow you to take your remote work and relocate abroad for anywhere from 1 year to 2 years. Now, typically before the pandemic hit, this term digital nomads was really for people that were spending 2 months here, one month here, and they were going all over, and also kind of taking advantage of some of these tourist visas where you can be there and you can be there for up to 3 months. But now a lot of countries are saying, okay, well, we've lost a lot of tourists and we've lost a lot of that, you know, income coming in from that. So what can we do to attract these long-term tourists? So a number of countries have now come up with these digital nomad visas where you can apply and you work remotely while living in the country. And the catch is that you have to work from outside of the country, right? So you couldn't come to Croatia and work for a Croatian company. It would have to be for an American country or company or whatever country you're from. So this is in contrast to the working holiday visa, because the working holiday visa actually allows you to work in that destination country. And all these visas, there's different requirements. You can look them up, but essentially they're all going to require that you have some sort of international health insurance, that you have some sort of, they do some sort of background check, you have some sort of sufficient income, and then there's usually some type of processing fee. Again, that's all going to vary. So we'll just go through some of these income requirements for each. So Croatia, where I live, they literally are just asking for proof of $5,000 in savings for the whole year, which wouldn't really get you through all of 1 year in Croatia, but hey, it's a start. Georgia, which requires $2,000 a month in income. Estonia is $4,150 a month. Dubai is $5,000 a month. Iceland is $7,000 a month. And then Antigua and Barbados is $2,000 for a processing fee, and then $50,000 for an annual income. So for those of you that, you know that with your type of work, you wouldn't be able to get a relocation with the company you're at, it would be, I would recommend looking into digital nomad visas. But one thing to know, it's definitely going to depend on the type of job that you currently have now. For some jobs that are in legal or maybe pharmaceuticals, there are some legal reasons that you can't bring your job abroad. But for those of you that might be looking for a new job, you could always kind of work around finding a job that's in whatever country you're in now and working there for X amount of time, anywhere from 6 months to a year or even more. And then once you've established that relationship, kind of present to them, hey, what do you think about me relocating? You know, I'm already working from home. A lot of us are already working from home. And that way you can go about it. There's actually quite a few of my friends here in Croatia that have done that, where basically they already had a job in the US, and then basically they kind of pitched it to them, hey, would you mind if I took my job and brought it to a new destination? So.
Awesome. So segueing a little bit from the digital nomads and the working holiday visas, a few things we wanted to talk about in times of COVID that makes things a little bit trickier or a little bit different than they have been in the past. Lynze, do you want to start off with that?
Yeah, sure, because I've seen a whole heap of crazy things happen during COVID. So firstly, I think when COVID first hit and all of the countries went on lockdown, what I saw personally was a lot of my professionals that were in process of getting their visa, it just came to a complete halt. There was a lot of unknowns. And you have to remember, like, these visa offices are government buildings. If the government is saying you can't go to work, then these visa workers aren't at work and they're not processing visas. So we saw a huge backlog start to happen when it came to processing foreign visas for work. And then in the spring, in the summer, I saw a lot of my clients all of a sudden who were waiting to start their job, or in the process of starting it, but waiting for their visa, that it got quickly done and that they were able to relocate as long as it was deemed safe. They took the right quarantine precautions, they took the right travel precautions, etc. The one thing that I think is important to really point out here is it's not like COVID stopped the work shortages, right? In some places, it became even more acute. So a lot of times when there was a work shortage of talent, like, not every single country and every single location is going to have access to all the talent they need. No country, no matter where you are, runs a perfect way of having the right talent at the right time from that country available. And so for that reason, that's one of the reasons that a lot of employers look externally, because they need, for example, engineers, nurses, doctors, neuroscientists, whatever it is, they need those people on the ground, and they need them now in order to hit their business strategy. That didn't go away with COVID. It wasn't like, okay, those all stopped overnight. In some cases, they became a lot more acute. I'm telling you, I have like the whole circus back here with me. It became a lot more acute of what that looked like. And so for that reason, people had, these businesses had to find ways to continue to hire talent, even if they couldn't process their visa, which entered the remote worker. So what I've seen is a lot of organizations kind of slow roll, like they're hiring. So for example, I had a client just last week who knows she's going to be moving to London, but there's no visas being processed right now. So she is a remote worker in the United States until, right? She's employed by the company there until they can safely move her to London. So what I'm finding is that businesses will always find a way, employers will always find a way to get the talent that they need with COVID or without COVID.
Yeah, that's really helpful. And from a travel industry perspective, what we see is there's a lot of like bureaucracy in the political side of the borders, like between the US and the Schengen zone and the EU. There's also like decisions that are being made on like the higher level, for example, like the EU and what it has done on an umbrella level. And then each individual country has different allowances as far as like border crossings, who they're letting in. And some of those have been really fluid with the way they've changed. I mean, with now that the vaccine is rolling out, we're starting to see like the ideas of a vaccine pass, for example, that might make it more possible. You know, there's also talks of like whatever that point is, that herd immunity. For example, we have partners in India where in New Delhi, like they're reaching herd immunity. So that will make an impact. So from the travel industry perspective, we're seeing kind of these like slow signs of like a little more normalcy toward border openings, maybe like in the summer and the fall. It's all pretty speculative still. It's all subject to change, but it does seem like a path to a bit more normalcy. And so that will probably translate into like visa processing and all of that as well. And then I don't know, Alex, if you have a couple comments on like kind of a destination perspective or what you've seen.
Yeah, I agree with kind of your assessment of everything. I mean, right now it's really hard to say anything kind of in concrete, but things are starting to move a bit more. For instance, last year in 2020, they had suspended a lot of these working holiday visas, right? So they just cut them for the rest of the year. You couldn't apply. But I believe those are starting to become more available. And then obviously a lot of these countries are promoting these digital nomad visas. For instance, Croatia literally yesterday just came out with all of the information for this digital nomad visa. And I've been in talks with a lot of the people that are pushing for it, had made this all possible. And, you know, for a country like Croatia that relies so heavily on tourism, that's 20% of the GDP here, they really are relying on remote workers to kind of come here and essentially be, yes, you know, expats or long-term, short-term residents, whatever, but also to kind of be these long-term tourists. And I also think that it can be a good thing. It can be a double-edged sword as well, but it's good to see some of these countries investing in long-term tourism and kind of from a more sustainable travel perspective. We just hope that when all of these remote workers come at some point, when they do, they'll be able to come safely with the vaccine being distributed and all that. So,
Yeah. So other challenges that are more just the typical challenges of moving abroad, we'll kind of cover all of these, and I'm sure there'll be more that'll come up in the questions. But Lynze, do you want to start kind of reiterating the whole finding work, chicken and egg, staying legally, when to apply, or like where to start kind of piece of it?
Yeah, some of this is up to your risk tolerance as well, but at a certain point in time, if you want to stay legally in a country, you do need a visa to support the length of time that you're going to be there, right? So you're going to have to switch from just a tourist visa into a work visa or a remote visa or a freelance visa. And the thing that I know is so tricky about this, y'all, is that there isn't like a one place for all of this information, and that there's not one website that will give you like all the visa insight that you need. And that's purposeful. I like to remind people that if countries made it super easy for everyone to apply to go to their to come to the country, etc., they have certain visas for that, like digital nomad, but they did it from a work perspective, it'd be really hard to keep up with the demand in certain locations. So they do make some of the barriers to entry high. So for me, I like to start with the work piece and where can I go to do really good work? What does that look like? Where does that look like? So that I can make sure that I have a visa support to follow it, so that I can be there for a longer period of time. Some people, you know, when it comes to the risk tolerance, should I just move and figure it out? Tourist visa to do it, but now that looks a little bit different. So you have to be more strategic and more planned due to what's going on with COVID about travel and where you're going.
Yeah, and just to add on to that, like I know for me, I've had two different experiences. Like when I went to teach English in South Korea, I had worked with a recruiter and I thought I had a job. And so I was like, oh, this is great. But like the contract and stuff was going to happen when I got there. It all ended up falling through. So I found myself without a job, already in Korea for a month, and then scrambling to find one. I did find a job and it was fine, but I had to be sent away on a visa run, like to go to Japan, to exit the country, to come back in with the correct visa. So I had to like go to Japan, hand over my passport to the Korean consulate, just like hang out until they were done. Took like a week and then come back. So it really will also depend on the country that you're in. Like in contrast, in Denmark, when I first entered the country, I came in on a tourist visa because my residency was still in process, but that happened while I was here and it turned over and I didn't have to like actually leave or anything like that. So that will, like Lynze said, There's definitely a risk tolerance piece of it. When I was back in my days and taught English in Korea, I think my risk tolerance was a lot higher. Like now, I'd say it's a lot lower. I like to be a little bit more planned and prepared. So that will really depend on your preferences and the country and the profession that you're in. So
Yeah, and just to dovetail off that, like it's your situation too, right? Like I, at this point in time, with a husband, a dog, and 2 kids, like couldn't do that. I could, but it would be probably the most stressful thing that I've ever done in my entire life, and I prefer not to have that be the option. So knowing and being prepared and having as much information as possible and a solid contract, et cetera, is for some of us just a necessity at some point.
And there's always going to be more paperwork when you get there too. There's always going to be just something that comes out of left field. A lot of people ask me what's the like exact process for Croatia, and I honestly like can't tell them because sometimes I don't even understand random paperwork they've given me here and there. And in Ireland, I remember I forgot to get like one thing stamped, and then they didn't put my name into the system or something. But actually, I was coming back from London, and they flagged me at the airport, and I was terrified. And they're really nice in Ireland, but they were like, there's just like one thing that you didn't submit, but your name is coming up here, and like you really need to go do that. And yeah, it can be a huge challenge staying on top of all of the paperwork and all of that.
Yeah, and then kind of paperwork aside, something to think about when you're moving abroad, especially if you're doing it alone, if you don't have a partner or you're not married, or creating a social network and making friends is a huge part of it. Because when you think about like life, and I mean, COVID aside, but the normal like social life that you might have, like somebody had asked earlier in the chat box about roots, or what if you feel rootless? And, having good people around you is a part of that. And it will also depend on if you're coming with a company, and so you kind of have some level of social built in through your work. But if you're coming in as like a digital nomad or an entrepreneur or something like that, you might need to even put more efforts out toward that. There are lots of groups like Meetup, or Internations is another one, that you can go to events and meet people. And I know for me, like the way I've made friends, like here in Denmark and other places, is I just tap into my existing network. Like, who knows somebody here, and then just kind of keep rolling and doing lots of coffees and lots of walks, and you build that over time, and it does come. But it is an important piece, and I think it's an important piece of that question about roots. I mean, how do you make roots, whether you're going to be in that place for 6 months or a year or 5 years or indefinitely? It will help you feel a lot more settled, because it is a really big thing to move abroad, especially whether you're doing it alone or with a partner. It's still a massive undertaking, and you need that kind of like leisure piece of your life to fall back on, to relax, and to be able to enjoy where you're living, because that's part of why you wanted to do it in the first place. So
Right.
yeah,
I found that Facebook groups are really helpful. There's so many good Facebook groups for international meetups, and I really struggled with that at first. When I was in Ireland completely by myself, I found an event on Facebook, and I showed up all by myself, and I ended up making some really good friends. And that's also how I've kind of built my friend group here. That's a mix of both other foreigners and then other Croatians too. So definitely something that takes time, but there are resources.
Lynze, do you want to tackle the family and pets?
Yeah, and
I'm questions about pets.
A lot of questions about pets. Yes, you probably saw my pet making all the ruckus. I have a 50-pound dog, so I don't have like a dog I can shove under the seat in front of me either. So bringing your family and pets abroad. I mean, for me, this is like why I do what I do, because I think that if I can create more amazing global humans and start doing it from when they're little, that is really important to me. So if you're thinking about going abroad, a lot of times, when I'm talking with parents, they'll say, I want to show my kid something different than that they've seen before. I want to give the opportunity to see the world from a different viewpoint and vantage. And I think that is spectacular. And if done in a way that can really bring a family together and just create like long lasting memories, which is awesome. And on the pet side as well, before I had kids, I traveled with Rue, my dog, and my husband. I probably should say my husband and my dog first. But he was a great way to create a social network, to like go out and practice the language and meet new people, etc. So pets actually come with more paperwork than kids. Kids, you're allowed to just kind of put in the flight and give them a passport and they'll get in, but pets, you have to have like different paperwork for depending on where you're going. My recommendation for pets, which can be anxiety provoking, because again, your kid can like sit in the seat next to you, but your pet might have to go under the the carrier, is to get as much information, as knowledge as you can, and find a vet who's done it before. That is really, really helpful. If you find a vet who has helped transfer pets internationally or helped you fly with pets internationally, they're going to get the paperwork. They're going to get what the country is looking for. And then, having that pet in that location, I think just brings that piece of home with you, which is really nice. And it can be really helpful in terms of meeting new people and giving your family a new experience.
Yeah, absolutely. So a big one that, depending on where you go and where you're from, culture will definitely play a huge role. So probably people have heard maybe the term culture shock, where you're like adjusting to a new culture. And even if you're going from a place, like I'm a US American, I am here in Denmark, which is, in Europe, in the West. I like my grandparents, like growing up, I had, some level of exposure to Danish culture, but it's actually quite different. There's like, every day I run into some like cultural nuance that I didn't realize, either making like a faux pas, or like someone says something to me and I don't really know how to understand it because it's a cultural difference. And even more so, like, for example, when I lived in Asia, maybe there are terms that you've heard of that when we talk about cultural like studies, for example, like individual cultures, like US is a good example. A lot of Americans are good, or I mean, a lot of European countries are a good example about individual cultures, where it's more focused on like you and maybe your immediate family, versus collective cultures, where it's more about like the group. What kind of impact do your actions have on the group? So one of the things that I would say is, when you're diving into where to go, whether it's profession driven, destination driven, look into like the cultural map or match. Like, how does it work with how you like to live? Like how your lifestyle or kind of your maybe upbringing was, or what you're used to. If you're a very like independent, autonomous person, it might take some adjustment to get used to a collectivist culture where people dress the same. You shouldn't like be loud on the bus or laughing, because like it's just really not like culturally acceptable. You should be like quiet and maintained, for example. So it's not a right or wrong thing. It's just different, and it's kind of getting used to it and educating yourself on like where you come from and what you're used to and what the norms are where you're moving to, and how can those two things meld. So it's really I think really fun building bridges between cultures and learning and like expanding your own perspective on it too. So Alex, do you want to add anything to that?
Yeah, I mean, it's really interesting how on the surface cultures might not look that different. I mean, I've only have experience living in the West, so I grew up in the US and have lived in Europe, both Ireland and now Croatia, but they're so different. Like Ireland was so okay, in some ways similar to Minnesota, where people were super friendly and all that, but they might not be as open to inviting you in right away or inviting you into the friend group, into the house, things like that. They weren't just communication styles, right? Like in the workplace, I noticed that people maybe weren't as direct as people are in Croatia, whereas people in Croatia, they do not, sugarcoat anything. They will just tell you exactly what they think, but they also are, they meet you right away and they're like, come in for wine type thing. And also different attitudes towards work. I found that Ireland was kind of somewhere in between the US and then other places in like Southern Europe, whereas Croatia, people are hardworking here, but work is just not people's main priority. It's just kind of the difference of how a lot of people say in the US people live to work, and then here people are more work to live. Obviously it's not exactly like that for everyone, but there definitely is a cultural difference with approach to work, and I think that's something to keep in mind when you do decide where you want to go abroad.
Yeah, absolutely. And with that language, we had a lot of questions about like, do you need to speak the language where you're applying for work or where you want to work? The first thing I would say is it's always useful to learn at least some language if you're going to be in a place. I mean, part of that is just like the culture piece. To really immerse yourself in culture, language is a huge part of that because there are expressions and there are words that are really only understood in that language from like the perspective of the environment around you. And so language is a really useful tool into that door to culture. From the work perspective itself, it's really going to depend on the profession that you're in and the company that you're working with. Because like, for example, again, when I was in South Korea, I didn't speak any Korean at all. Teaching English, it wasn't necessary, it wasn't required. I definitely tried to learn some Korean while I was there. I love language and I speak Spanish and I've studied Portuguese and Arabic and now I speak Danish, but like for some reason Korean was really hard for me. So I did my best, but I didn't need it there. However, here in Denmark, like, yes, people speak English. However, they really prefer you to speak Danish or at least try. And if I, at some point, I mean, I'm an entrepreneur now, so I work for myself, but at some point, if I were ever to pursue work in Denmark for a Danish company, I would absolutely need to speak Danish because that's how their internal function is. There were some questions about like resumes and applying and like, what's the best way to do it? That's really going to depend on the company, or not the company, the country, and language requirements. You might have to do it in the other language. You might need to write your cover letter like in Danish, for my example. And in some places, it might be in English, but it's going to be a totally different format. So I think language is an important piece to consider. As a Spanish speaker, I always loved when I lived or spent longer periods of time in Latin America because the language of Spanish is so varied. And so I would get like all the different nuances from the different countries and constantly like expanding skills. And then back to that second point with the creating social networks and making friends, like it's a huge door into that because it's like, again, another example of the social side here in Denmark. Like if I'm invited, Danes tend to be very private with their social lives. They're very like warm, friendly people, but when it comes to private lives or inviting people over, it's kind of more rare because they have these kind of set groups. And one of the barriers is language, because if you have 9 Danes and you're a 10th person coming over, but you don't speak the language, it's kind of hard to expect that everyone starts speaking in English versus in Danish. You could apply that to any language, but just an example being, no, it's not necessarily necessary, but depending on where you're moving, it can be an advantage, both from a hiring professional standpoint and just from a lifestyle, social standpoint. So other questions that came up for sure about the moving process itself. Lynze, do you want to talk about that? I know you have lots of clients that have gone through this process.
Yeah, lots of people that have moved. One of the things that I typically just tell my clients to dissuade from is spending more time planning their move than their job search and time abroad, because one comes before the other, right? Like usually you have to land that job to get that visa to then be able to move. But doing all the moving things and all that information can be quite attractive, but it can have you drowning in information and kind of veering away from like to have to secure that job first. But I hear typically like the same things about moving from all my clients that have moved. One is that they wish they would have just brought less stuff. Like you don't need what you think you need, and moving your things, physical things, can be really expensive. So just being really shrewd about what you're taking with you internationally. I always say you're better to just buy extra luggage, extra luggage for the airplane, and then try to ship things, because depending on where you're shipping things and trying to get, unless your company's paying for all of this, which again is rare, it can be quite expensive, and it can take like 6 months. So you could take 6 months to get your coffee maker just to realize it's actually the wrong adapter, and you blew it up the first time you used it, right? So that's something to take into consideration. Another one of moving is to give yourself a grace period. So I know it's so fun to look at apartments online, to be like, I think I want to live in this neighborhood or that neighborhood or this location, but you really don't know until you're there. There's like that feeling, that vibe that you get when you're in a place and you know that it's the right spot, I always say give yourself like 30 to 60 days just to transition. Rent an Airbnb, find, do you really like that location? Because it looks can be deceiving online, and you can do a lot of research and get there and realize I don't feel good in this space. This isn't the space for me. So allow yourself that time. And then the other one is there are going to be a lot of little annoying details that happen with the move. It's just kind of the price you pay. It's like when you move in the US, you move abroad, you have to set up, your water and your electricity and your phone. That all gets even more complex when you go abroad because it's new. They do it different than how you do it in your home country. So how you're going to get a phone number, how you're going to get a bank account will look different for example, in the UK, in London, than it's going to look in New York. And so allowing for usually double the amount of time or sometimes triple the amount of time, depending on where you're moving to, for some of those little things to come together can allow you to give yourself the grace period needed to make it a smooth transition and not something that's super stressful.
Yeah, absolutely. Especially the grace period. There's always a little extra buffer, never hurts. So kind of these last three, taxes, banking, legal, are very much going to depend on, where you are, but taxes just is like a quick high level. Many countries have tax treaties so that you're not paying double tax in two countries. So that's certainly something to look into. Although in the US, we do still pay income tax. There are exemptions, but there's still some level of tax there. And typically, and Lynze, correct me if I'm wrong, but typically if you're in an employer situation where you have an employer, they're going to take care of that for you, at least for the country. Like if you're employed in a country, that country's tax requirements are going to be taken care of. You'll still need to file your taxes in the US, but it should be fairly easy because of the exemptions, and that's being taken care of. If you're self-employed, like in my case, it gets much more complicated because you have to find the right entities to talk to in the country that you're in, have the right reporting forms, figure out the timing. Like for my case, I file my taxes in the US first, so then I can use that as a base to file in Denmark. But that has taken dozens of hours of research to even get to that. Of course, you can certainly work with an accountant if need be, depending on your situation. Also keeping in mind that banking can be quite difficult. It actually took me like 2 months to open a bank account as a self-employed person in Denmark. Again, if you have an employer situation, it's probably much easier because essentially you have this sponsor that is saying in that country to that bank, like, this person is trustworthy, they have a salary coming from us, they're going to put their money in the bank, and it's not illegal money or anything like that. So it makes it quite easy. In the case of self-employment, opening a bank was excruciatingly painful, especially how in the US, typically you can go have a bank account opened in like 30 minutes. So 2 months to an opening was a shocker for me, I felt like. So just that's something to keep in mind. And then we've talked a lot about kind of just all of the different kind of legalities on your residency, on maybe other things. Health insurance is something that we didn't really talk about here, but that also is something to keep in mind. Again, in a situation where you have an employer, it's probably covered. It also depends on the country, because in like my situation in South Korea, as well as in Denmark, they have national coverage, so I'm part of that. If you're in a more of a digital nomad or a remote type of situation, there are different companies that offer long-term plans. So I was actually on the road for almost 2 years, in between things, between living in Austin and between living in Denmark. And I had like an international coverage plan. So I wanted to make sure that, should there be an emergency, I had some kind of network and some kind of coverage. So that's also something to be thinking about as well. So Lynze or Alex, anything to add?
Yeah, with health insurance, I have an international plan, and then I also have coverage here in Croatia. It's honestly quite cheap. It's about $80 a month, and that gives me coverage if I need to go to the hospital for anything, and some basic coverage. But I do have the international for when I travel, and just kind of as another just another level of coverage. And yeah, basically with everything you said, depending on the country and the situation, like you really just need to take it one step at a time, because sometimes it's like you need to figure out your job. Well, most of the times you need to figure out your job situation and then dive into the living situation. I also agree, you have to usually get there first. I didn't have a place until I got to Ireland. I just had an Airbnb at first. And then you kind of go through these different tiers of figuring out your banking and then taxes down the line and all that.
Yeah. So we're going to move on to questions here in just a minute. I have a couple more things to cover, but just as like, because seeing some of the questions, just as kind of like a big picture summary in terms of like starting the process, one of the things I would say to recommend is like narrowing it down. Like, what are the professions that you could, work in? What maybe opportunities are already in your wheelhouse through your current employment situation? What destinations are you interested in? Because it's so easy to think like the world is my oyster. I could live anywhere. I want to live anywhere. You get really lost and it gets really confusing. So I find that like crystallizing a few true things for you in your situation will really help hone your research. Because if you don't have a clear starting point, you need to make one, and even do just like a brainstorm exercise and then start connecting the dots and then come up with some clear points. So that's kind of one of the big picture questions that has come up repeatedly. So I thought maybe I'd just point that out. And Lynze, I don't know if you have some like high level tips before we move on to questions as well.
It's the same. It's that you have to kind of narrow down and focus. Like sometimes I see people and they're like, I could be a digital nomad. I could go after that visa, or I could go after an employment visa, or I could go after a work study visa. You need to do a little bit of like, like a come to Jesus moment about like, what is it that I want my future to look like? And then how do I back into the best decision for that? And sometimes that's not always the easy decision, right? And sometimes that's not only just like lobbing in an application for a work holiday visa. It might be, hey, I want to progress my profession. And so this is going to look a little bit different and a little bit harder from a like finding and securing a job standpoint, but it will save you so much time of like moving 10 things an inch and nothing a mile.
Yeah, definitely. So we're going to move on to questions in just a minute, but first I wanted to point out some resources, and don't worry about like writing these down because we will be sending out the replay, and I'll also have all these links, but these will be really helpful if you kind of have some ideas or even coming up with those starting points that maybe you want to consider. And also, we do these talks every month, even a couple times a month. And the next one is actually going to be on ocean sustainability and travel, if that is a topic that interests you. We don't have the date for it, but it will be in March. So just keep an eye out because we'll be having that. And again, I'll be sending out a follow-up email with all of these links and everything, but do definitely feel free to reach out to any of us if you have specific questions. For me on the travel side, for Alex with her experience or travel tips, and also with Lynze, if you have a really clear idea and are wanting to get that process going. So I'll send a follow-up on that. But let's get to some questions. So I know everyone's been writing in the chat boxes. So I'm going to, okay, so I'm going to start with we have lots and lots of questions. I'm going to start with one that came up a little bit earlier. On two. So one person asked, as a Black woman, is it safe for me to travel? She was specifically mentioning Georgia. I can't speak to Georgia in particular, but I'm also going to tie it into another question, which is about female travel as well. It's a very broad question. So I would say first kind of looking at the destination is one of the parts of it, because there have been other questions about like gay travel as well. It depends on, that can also make a difference, like depending on where you are. Like Lynze, I know you've had more experience in the Middle East. So I would say with those questions, starting with like research on the destination, maybe looking for some blogs would be a really good place to start based on personal experience. I think that's a good starting place in learning. And of course, putting your own safety is important. We have quite a few blogs on just traveling as a female traveler. And ways you can look out for yourself. Time and place matters. Building a community matters when you're living somewhere. So like if you are a person of color traveling, I would definitely say that Finding a good support community would be an important piece of that, because you'll really learn a lot from those that have experience in that destination. So hopefully that's a start to that question. I don't know, Alex or Lynze, if you have anything you want to add to that. No? Okay, so more questions. I'm going to ask one for Alex. Sorry, lots of questions. So recruiting, actually this, Lynze, I'll give this one to you. Recruiting career placement norms and placement agencies for short-term overseas assignments. Do you ever work with agencies, or do you recommend agencies?
So it really is industry specific, where agencies can come into play. So for example, like if you're going to work for the UN or the World Bank or something like this, that really do short consulting projects internationally, there's a lot of times agencies that help them fill those roles and support those roles. But overall, like if you think of this from a recruiter standpoint, okay, so if I'm a recruiter and I get paid by placing people, then I'm going to try to place the easiest candidate. That's a good fit, right? I don't mean that like in a mean way from a recruiter standpoint, but I'm going to try to place someone who can start the job very easily. And if I know there's a whole bunch of paperwork involved with having someone from abroad get that position, then I'm probably less likely to put them forth for it, unless I think they're like knock the socks off of me. So recruiters, while I think they're super valuable and they have a lot of good intel and information about what's happening on the ground, actually are harder to place foreign candidates because like it's just harder for them to get. The longer that it takes for them to place, the less likely, they don't get paid until they're placed. So I prefer to go straight to the hiring manager, straight to the organization itself, and do my own work and have me be in control of my destiny within that organization or within that company, and not leave it up to a recruiter. But some industries, again, like they use agencies or they use recruiters as the way, especially if they're big international, they're doing short-term assignments to help people get into those. But for the vast majority of us, myself included, I'm going to struggle with a recruiter going the full mile because I involve a lot of paperwork.
That's helpful. I'm going to switch gears on another question about retirement. So quite a few people ask, like, as a retiree, I would like to move abroad, or finding volunteer positions was another of the questions. I'll say a few things. So if you are interested in working, like ESL could be a possible type of job that you could get. And in some places there's part-time teaching English positions. So that could be something that's like lighter and more fun as a retired person. If you're retired and not looking for work, but looking to live there, some countries, like I know Ecuador has this, where you can get visas, you just have to prove income, but you can be able to live there. So there's a lot of like lifestyle type of places that you can go in, like maybe Central America, Ecuador being the other example, to live as well. And I know Thailand is another place that I've heard about retirement communities as well. I'm not as much of an expert on the destinations themselves, but I do know that it's possible. And I know that oftentimes part of the drive of moving abroad as a retired person is going somewhere where the cost of living is lower. And so that can be really advantageous. And nature opportunities, cultural opportunities, there's lots of those. So the question about volunteer positions for retirees, that's a kind of whole nother subject that we talk a lot about in responsible travel. The short version is to really highly vet volunteerism, because in theory, it could sound really nice, but it isn't always the best thing for the local community. And so again, there are a lot of amazing nonprofits and amazing NGOs out there that are doing great work, but you do want to be careful where you choose to spend your volunteer time, because sometimes it actually isn't the best for the local people or community. So those are kind of the ideas that I have in terms of retirement. I don't know, Lynze or Alex, if you have something you wanted to add to that.
Yeah, and in some cases, if you choose to buy property, if you want to be living in a place for either the entire year or for the full year, that can kind of help you in terms of becoming a resident. It really depends on the country. I saw there's questions about 401k. I'm not really sure how that works. I think you would have to look online for that and maybe even talk to a financial advisor. But I will tell you this, there are a lot of international retirees, whether or not they are in whatever destination for the entire year or part of the year. So it definitely is possible.
Yeah. And I would say for things like the 401k and pensions and all of that, that would be a better question for a tax advisor or accountant. And I would look, if you aren't already working with an accountant, I would look for one who specifically works with like international, I mean, it can be your US accountant, but works with like foreign residency or foreign earned income, but is familiar, because there's so many different laws between countries and tax treaties between countries. And of course, you want to make sure that your money is both protected and usable. So I would say that. Let's see, so many questions. Lynze, do you want to talk a little bit about the new graduates conversation?
Sure. Yeah. So the question was, can I work abroad as a graduate, or should I just do a working holiday visa or teach English, etc.? So I worked abroad right out of undergraduate. Like a month after I graduated, I moved to the UAE for a job in government affairs. And what I found was that where there was a need for, like they weren't graduating people in that field or that specialty, that they want younger talent to come in to help grow and spend more time there. So it's less of like a 1-year assignment, 2-year assignment. They knew I was going to be there for a long period of time. That some countries make it actually advantageous to hire younger professionals who are right out of school. And you'll see a lot of rotational programs at like some of the bigger international companies that will say like, this is for people who are 1 year out of school or 1 year out of their undergraduate or 1 year out of their master's program, because they want you to come in and invest time in that country and in time within that company as well. So the visa process can actually be easier for them.
Yeah. Yeah. A couple other questions that kind of all are related is like timing of when to apply and all of those things. One thing that I would say is it's never too early to start planting seeds. You never know what connections you might be making today that 2 years down the road will lead you to that job you've been wanting or that place that you've been wanting to live. So I do think that even in the age of COVID, where we're not as like socially out there, it's still a great time to network, find groups on Facebook, for example. Start talking to people and getting people's experience, because I think those seeds can come to fruition later for sure. I know for me and my path in my life, they definitely have, and I'm sure Alex and Lynze probably had the same. So, are there any more questions that we didn't address? Feel free and put them in the chat.
I see a lot of questions about placement agencies.
Lynze, you kind of touched on that a little bit. I don't know if you want to say any more.
Yeah, from my perspective, it's I don't love to put my destiny in the hands of someone else. So I think placement agencies serve a purpose and are good, but similar to joining a company and hoping they'll transfer me abroad in 5 to 7 years, I've just never been someone who was like okay with that. I was like, I want to be able to make sure that I'm in charge of my career, in charge of my destiny, etc. So I think they're really good to get some insight about where employment is happening. And that's what job boards are awesome for, y'all. Like, job boards are amazing to show you what is the demand in this country, what are the prerequisites, what kind of organization or what kind of jobs do they need for what types of organizations. But applying online for international positions hardly ever works. Like, if you did that, you were like the needle in the haystack. Amazing, awesome that happened. But for the 99.9% of us, applying online for foreign jobs doesn't work. And so it goes back to being in control of your destiny, networking, knowing where the opportunities are, reaching out to the hiring managers, doing your research. Those have been the ways that I have found the vast majority of people being successful landing a job on the ground.
Yeah. And there's a question about job boards. I Lynze, do you have specific job boards in mind? I mean, from my experience, what I've seen is it really depends on the destination because they'll have different types of hiring type sites, what you can look on. And so I think you might have to, for the person that's asking the question, you might have to narrow it down on where you're looking because it's going to be more localized.
Yeah, I think that's a good thing, depending on where they're going. One of the things that I really discourage is translating job descriptions, unless you're like, if you need to translate a job description, then you shouldn't be applying for that job, just to be honest with you, right? Because like they're telling you, they're indicating to you that in order to do this job, they're expecting. And if you have to translate it, then that expectation hasn't been met. But don't despair. Like if you're going to local job boards, et cetera, and you're not seeing anything in English or in your native language, then you just need to open it back up a little bit to LinkedIn, to Glassdoor. And again, I use job boards as indicators. They are like hot leads about what is going on right now. But we know that 80% of positions are either posted with already someone in mind who they're giving it to, or are never posted. And so finding your way to those positions is usually more successful in landing that international position.
Yeah, there are some remote job boards. There's actually a link in the resources that Traverse is going to send out, but it's a bunch of different remote jobs and different websites you can look at for those. And I know a lot of people have found luck there. But for me in Ireland, when I came to Ireland, I didn't have a job already. And I had read a lot that in this specific case with working holiday situation, that it was better to get there first, get situated and all that, and then look for a job. And I met other people who ran into like scammer situations where they had someone promise them a job and it sounded really legit and it wasn't. But I did work with basically kind of like a temp agency at first to get my foot in the door at this university study abroad job. And then from there, I was hired on. So sometimes when you're doing working holiday situations, I guess it's not placement agencies, but temp agencies, stuff like that can be helpful just to get your foot in the door. But yeah, that's just my experience.
We have a question about the possibility of working at universities abroad, like as an international counselor. I think that will partly depend on like your experience working in higher education, and also again kind of comes down to like where and which universities, because a lot of times like a lot of jobs in general come out of connections, out of network connections. So Alex, I don't know if you want to add anything to the kind of working for universities abroad piece.
Yeah, so it's really hard to apply for those type of jobs online, to be honest. And you can look, and when you see jobs posted, oftentimes it says we're looking for, citizens of X country, and you can automatically tell you're not going to qualify. I've had a lot of people ask me questions about this with Ireland. And it is true that a lot of these universities, what they do is they work with temp agencies, and then they'll keep some of these people on long term. But what I found is a lot of them, because they're public universities, at least in Ireland, they're not really able to take people on for like a long-term period of time. So I was considering staying in Ireland, but they weren't able to like sponsor my visa beyond my working holiday situation. So I think unless you're doing working holiday where you go there and you find a job opening, when you have your visa sorted, you maybe need to be like a professor of some sort, which is another thing, because there are a lot of professors. I met a lot during my time that have lived in multiple different places, especially in higher ed. And that can be a good way to get in, or going to school, and then eventually maybe working for the university that you studied at.
Yeah. We had someone mention LinkedIn. That's definitely can be really good. I know here in Denmark, it's a really common networking site. So any more questions before we close it out? No? Well, thank you so much for joining us today. We really enjoyed having everyone. Be on the lookout. We'll be sending you the replay with all of the links again, like I said, feel free to reach out to any of us personally with questions. We're more than happy to help. Glad you could join us. And also tell us your success stories. Like, remember us in a couple years. If you end up, somewhere, we would love to hear about it. So send us a little note. So take care, everyone. Thank you.
Bye.
Hello.
Bye.